I'm almost DJ. Sorry, I'm handling two computers, so Germany. Hold on. What's up? All right. So, Martin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. So, welcome everyone, and thank you all for being here in this panel today. So we discussed about the topic of the panel that we should have in the last day. We were discussing which scientific idea should we have in the panel. And for a summer school, it was difficult because you all have very different interests, but also what joins you is this problem, which is how to do a PhD, how to finish a PhD and what to do afterwards. And that's how we came up with this idea for this panel at the end of the day. And so we invited PhD graduates that are nowadays much more than just that. So we invited Asia, who is a tenure-track faculty member at Max Planck Institute. We invited Mariana, who is the head of research at Clarify.ai. Cleverly, sorry.
I mean, not send this without no.
I know. And Pavel Calado, who is the director of software engineering at GIMPAS, and Martin de Rijk, who is a full professor at the University of Amsterdam. So the key thing that joins everyone in this panel is that they all have PhDs and they all have followed different career paths after the PhD. So I will start by asking Asia to tell us about a bit of her timeline, I guess.
Sure. The road that took me to my position was quite winding, so that's maybe also useful for people to know that it's okay to try out different things and see what you like and what you don't like. I started in computer science. I studied at the computer science department with a very theoretical orientation, theoretical algorithmics and logic. During that time, I also worked as a software developer and in different e-commerce companies. Towards the end of my studies, I decided to try something different. I decided to go on an Erasmus exchange. I'm sure people in Europe know what Erasmus is. And I ended up in Germany at another Max Planck Institute. There I started working as a student assistant on projects related to knowledge extraction and knowledge graphs. I really liked it there. I decided to stay for my PhD, and at the time, my future advisor asked me whether I wanted to continue in that line of work or change to a different topic that he had recently got excited about, and that was privacy in big data and on the web. I decided to take that option and switch to working on privacy. I worked on privacy in information access systems and search engines and recommender systems. And towards the end of my PhD, I got really interested in topics I covered in my lecture yesterday, so topics of the societal impact of technology. And my last project in my PhD was actually a project on fairness in search systems. Then I went to Canada, to Microsoft Research Montreal for my postdoc. I worked on a team called FATE, which stands for Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics in AI. This is a group that's comprised of people from a variety of different fields working on similar problems, but with very different perspectives. And that's where I learned how to do interdisciplinary collaborations with impact. And this is something that I'm trying to now do for the group that I'm building, such how to do interdisciplinarity in an academic environment. That was my role that brought me here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, Marianne, would you like to?
Yes, so I started with I did electrical engineering. I always liked math, and so and then I went to get postdoc PhD on image processing. Focusing this, and I was more towards academic path, I would say. I also started a postdoc and did some lectures, but then I found out like what was to be in a company and what can I do just at that time, like we were publishing and not only the papers, but what could we actually do and how things happen in companies. And there was this opportunity to work for a company that actually had a lot of collaborations with the university and in a very interesting topic, which is NLP. And so yeah, I was lucky to get there, and I was there for 4 years. We were doing research, applied research. We had very strong connections with universities. Actually having some projects also with Rome and yeah, after 4 years, I was challenged to go to that company. Was not a startup, so it was like very stable and small, and there was opportunity to try a company. There was startup and feedback that was growing a lot and a different application, different type of data. At the time I was developing methods to detect whether transactions are fraudulent or not. Finally, after two years after that, I was challenged. So I was working there in the research group as a data scientist. And then I was challenged to go to a very early stage startup. So we were like 5 people. And to be responsible for the data science area. And I found that the group was, the team was very experienced and good. Project made a lot of sense, and I could bring value and have more responsibility based on the experience that I had. So yeah, I took the opportunity. We stayed there for 1 year and a half, and last September, so it was February. The company was automating, so developing machine learning to make customer support more efficient. So suggesting replies to agents, automating some replies, detecting intent, also working in conversations, in email, and last September we were acquired by Zendesk. That is an international company, much bigger, and that acquired us to empower the AI in their products. So Zendesk is a platform that collects information on customer support and organizes it in a simple, effective way. And customer support has a lot of efficiencies. That is what we were tackling. So now I have a team with, so talking about the interdisciplinary teams, this is something that you see a lot in companies, so that you can bring more value to the product. So people from product, engineers, data scientists, data analysts, and in order to build something that has more impact. And my team, we are about 9, also having some master students. So it's been a journey, as you say, like don't be afraid to try different things, and this makes sense.
All right, so Martin, would you like to share with us your timeline, career timeline?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I did 2 master's degrees, first one in philosophy and then in parallel in math, and then I did a PhD in more theoretical computer science, working on things like complexity and knowledge representation. Then after I was done, during my PhD, it was not very customary to do industrial internships, but certainly a lot of academic internships. So I spent half a year at Imperial College in London, and then another half year or so at Stanford. After I was done, this was when the web was sort of exploding, and so there were lots of opportunities for startups in that space. And so I began a postdoc and helped out with a startup. After a while, the work with the startup began to be very repetitive, so I stopped and discovered that what triggers me is do new stuff, be a beginner again and again and again. So postdoc, then that was at the Center for Math and Computer Science here in the Netherlands. Then my first proper academic job was at the University of Warwick. Then after 2 years, I got a better offer here at the University of Amsterdam. Another 2 years later, 3 years later, became associate professor. Another 3 years later, a full professor. What has happened in the meantime was shifting away from the areas where I started originally, very theoretical, to more information retrieval, search and recommendation topics. Another thing that happened was building teams. First of all, in your career, you're not quite sure whether the track that you're on is your track and whether you're good at it, whether you enjoy it. But then after a while, you discover that you're doing okay. And then you begin to look not just after your own development, but also increasingly at the development of people around you, and begin to build teams like Aisha also described. And so that's been what I've been doing. I've helped a few startups along the way. 2 years ago, I actually ventured off for half-time roughly to a retail company, but then found myself for about half of my time doing helping set up R&D there. But then after a while, found myself working insane number of hours, so I had to cut it. So I'm back full time at the university as of about a year ago. There you are.
Thank you very much. Now, Pavel, it's your turn. You like to share with us your timeline?
Yes. So now I'm going to tell what happens when you don't try different things. So I was on my undergraduate, I was really interested in AI, so I chose to specialize in AI. At the end, I had an opportunity to do a project that was a recommendation system, a new recommendation system. This project was in collaboration with the university in Brazil, so I went there to work for 2 months on that project, and I ended up staying for 7 years. So while I was there, I started my master's degree, and when I was doing the master's, one of my colleagues founded a company, startup. You might say that at that time no one talked about startup. It was just a new company. The company with a meta search engine. You know what a meta search engine is? Because do they still exist? I'm not even sure. Anyway, it was a meta search engine. I worked with them for a while. Then the company was bought by a bigger company. And at that time, he asked, so do you want to come with us to the bigger company? I said, no, I want to do what I want to keep doing what I'm still doing. I will go on with my master's. So I went on with my master's. I started a PhD also. And during my PhD, my advisor also founded a company. Maybe you already called it a startup by then, I don't know. And this time it was a search engine, like a normal search engine. So I was there with them, and the company was bought by Google. And he asked, so do you want to come with us? And I said, no, I want to keep doing what I'm doing. So I continued on my PhD. I finished the PhD, and I came back to Portugal, where I became a professor at the University of Lisbon, technical University of Lisbon, also professor. I was there for many years. I don't know how many. And then, the first friend, my first colleague, the one that had started the company with the meta search engine, said, I'm going to Portugal to found a startup. Now, this time for sure it was called a startup. Do you want to come with me? And, finally, after so many years, I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And I started with them on a startup that did, so what I was doing was basically information extraction, extracting geographical information from articles. And, the company was bought by a bigger company. And this time I stayed with them. I went with them to the bigger company. So now I'm at GPAS, and what I'm doing there is I lead the search and fact management team. So it's a straight line with some bumps, not a winding road.
Thank you. So I've shared with you a couple of questions, well, more than a couple of questions that I think that would be interesting for you or for us to discuss them. So I'm sharing the questions with you. So so this is just a notice. So apparently my computer is running out of battery, and the Zoom connection is spinning more than the charger is charging. So I'm struggling here, but we all have the questions. So in case my battery runs out, we have the questions. Okay. So these are the first questions. So you can pick one or all of them, and who would like to go first? Maybe Asia. Asia is right here, within reach. So,
You need a laptop.
Okay, I will see the slides.
I can.
So you have here the questions. So.
Any question?
Any question, or is there any question that you prefer to see discussed first? No questions. They're all important. Okay.
I'm going to start with a question about the problem difficulty, because I think this is something that everybody stumbles upon in research, that some people may feel blocked, right? Like, we don't see a way forward and we don't know what to do. So there are some, I guess, mental heuristics that we can develop in situations like this. And perhaps the most obvious one is just try to simplify. Forget about the fact that you have to publish a paper on a given topic and you need this paper to graduate. But imagine that you need to solve this problem. Even if the solution is dirty and it's going to be simple and perhaps it's not something that is publishable, imagine that you have to solve this problem right now. What is the simplest solution, even the most dirty one, that is going to get me there? This is something that has unblocked me quite a few times in the past. And then once you have that solution, even if they're the simplest ones, it probably gives you a lot of insight about the problem itself, about the structure of the problem, about potential other avenues that you could take. And you can go from there, right? Then make it as complex as necessary to get this published, but start simple and come up with a solution that does work. So this is something that has helped me in the past. And the second thing that perhaps is often underappreciated, but also just common sense solution is just talk to people. Talk to your advisors, talk to your colleagues, to other students. Sometimes even just thinking through the problem and having to walk someone else through the complexities and difficulties of the problem that you're facing is going to help you uncover perhaps some things that you have not noticed before. So talk to others and try to simplify as much as possible. I think the things that I have tried in the past have been tremendously helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, also agree a lot. So very important things. I think related to simplify is like trying to break it down in some problems. Sometimes it's too weak and maybe it's not the right approach so much this time in that way, but you can find out some problems that are interesting and then you can go on top of them. And in companies, you sometimes will also do a lot of concepts to see if something is worth to continue or have a smaller idea to like cut the uncertainty that you have at that time, or have it like minimum value products, like what is the minimum thing that I can do here, and then we will look at that. Yeah. That question, that's very
Yes. So I don't know if Martin or Paolo would also like to add to this question or to answer some other question.
I can add that I think an important thing is not to get frustrated, because if you're doing research, there will always be problems. Sometimes problems that you cannot find a good solution for them. Sometimes you just come to the conclusion that I cannot improve on what is already there, or I cannot solve this problem. So it's to be expected, I think. And I know for someone who is just starting or doing a PhD, finishing a PhD, it's kind of scary, because sometimes you feel like you're going nowhere, I suppose. But and you have a timeline, you have a deadline, like you need to do something by that time, and you're afraid if you cannot do it. But I'm pretty sure you'll always get somewhere if you follow the strategies that you already heard here. And even if you don't get frustrated, there are many problems out there that need to be solved. So if yours is not working out, you can always move on to it.
Yeah, and maybe another thing to add here is so you want to achieve something, contribute something. Sometimes a contribution could be a solution, or chopping up a big problem into smaller problems and then coming up with solutions to these smaller problems. Sometimes a contribution to your discipline is, hey folks, we have a really tough problem here, and those methods don't work. And so increasingly, for instance, we see at some of our conferences these perspective papers. And they can be a really nice venue for you to share a problem that you haven't solved, and you draw attention to this, and in a sense, make more people a co-owner of this problem, and that can be an important contribution.
I think that related to this problem, this question is like the first one, or like how do I know that I'm working on the problem. So I think that like making questions, and so if you have a difficult problem, try to evaluate your initial questions on what is like, why am I doing this? Why is this important? What are parts of this that are important? I think there are various ways depending on the cost function that you want to optimize. So when you're working on a problem, I don't know, maybe there may be this trend, or academia, or so, like you have trends of important things that people are working on. So maybe it's good to work on that problem, but you maybe have more probabilities to publish. But I generally prefer to think what this makes sense, and try to find yourself and question yourself what makes sense, what brings value, does this make sense, and that's also part of the other question that was breaking down the problem. And okay, maybe it's too difficult, but it's worth to mention. So yeah.
So maybe one question that would be interesting to discuss is how to cope and how to handle rejected papers. I think this is when you're a PhD, because you're particularly under pressure, you have to publish somehow. Well, not somehow, but you have to end your PhD somehow. So, and for that you need to publish, and it's common to get rejected papers, and how to handle that.
I'm going to start by saying that it is probably the worst thing that can happen if you don't get rejected a lot during your PhD. Because then later in your career, one has to handle rejection at an even higher rate. Like if you're in a faculty position, right, applying for grants, the acceptance rates are even worse than for papers. And actually, the start of my PhD was very rough. So my first paper got rejected 4 times before it was finally accepted in one of our top tier conferences, and it was a very harsh lesson. But I think it was necessary for me to, learn how to deal with this kind of frustration, and then how to write papers better, how to select problems better. So in this sense, now that I'm advising my students, one thing I worry about is that it's going to be too easy for them if they don't get rejected enough. And during your PhD, you're also shielded by others. So use this opportunity to talk to your advisor, to get some tips on how to handle this, right? Because then as you move on, as you become more independent, this gets harder because then you're really on your own with these rejections very often. So treat this as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I've published a few papers. I've had many more rejected, and I never get used to it. And so, yeah. So what do? You try to understand what happened, why it happened, how you can do a better job. And you try again. Also, it's important to realize you are not your papers. As a researcher, you're way more than your papers. You are the ideas. You're the person who communicates ideas. You are a member of a team, etc. So, if you get rejected in the manner that Aisha described, and so 4 times, unfortunately, one of my students who just had her thesis approved by her committee, so everything ended up well, but her first paper got rejected 12 times. 12 times, extremely painful, but then at some point, maybe some of the ideas were too early, maybe the audience wasn't quite the right audience, but she stuck with it, but also realized that she is not her paper. She's much more than her papers. And so that's important to keep in mind.
I never had a paper rejected that much, but it shows a lot of persistence, I would say. So yeah, I think that takes like in any failures, so nobody wants to fail, but failures have also a good part of it, because that's generally where we learn more. Yeah, when we get a rejected paper, we have also some reviews and try to improve based on those reviews and look for another feedback source, like for another place to publish and improve based on feedback. It's generally, I think, I'd say generally for life, not only for the papers. But yeah, I agree that can be hard.
There's a lot of randomness in the decision-making process for papers. So usually, some of the papers submitted to a conference are really good. Some of them are really bad, but most of our papers are somewhere in the middle. And so there's a big chance that you unfortunately fall off the table. That's not because your paper is so much worse than others or others are so much better than yours. No, it's just because there's a finite number of slots that's available at conferences. So it helps to make life easier for your reviewers. Look at the reviewing forms that they have to fill out. Make sure you sort of spoon feed what they need to do in order to reach a decision, but also the message that you want to get across. Don't hide it. Help them discover it quickly, early, clearly, so that they can also stand up and champion your paper when decision time comes and the program committee has to decide between many decent, equally good papers. And it helps if one of the reviewers champions your paper. You have to help them.
Right, and this also shows that writing is actually a critical skill for your PhD, and it can make a difference for exactly the same great work, right, between an accepted and a rejected paper. So write a lot and get feedback.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's an extremely important skill. I think it's neglected by many, but it's also something that you can learn in practice. So the more you write, the better it will come. And I mean, rejected or not, you will start to get the patterns. You will start to see, to understand. You know, this is not scientific. Let's say it's engineering. It's you start to understand if your work should be, submitted to this place or to that place, because you know the type of things. You start to learn the type of things that are interesting for this community or for the community, or this audience, and so on. Of course, the random factor is always there. But if it's well written, if it's written in an interesting way, if your target is the right target, it has a better chance of being accepted, and you will learn that. You will learn that by trying and by failing and by trying and by failing. You will learn it. So I think more important, I think like 12 rejections on a paper, you have to handle the impact on your self-esteem, but it's better than just submitting one paper, right? Because I'm sure the student Martin mentioned learned a lot from those 12 rejections.
So let's ask for feedback from peers. How this can help. As Marcel was saying, so doesn't mean that if it's rejected, that it was fair, right? So a lot of times there is a lot of randomness, and it may not be fair. Like being more clear helps, but it again, like it's like in life. Like most things in life are not going to be fair, but I think learning how to continue and communicate so that things get better.
What also helps is if you, this is tough, is you give yourself a deadline that's 1 month before the deadline of the conference. You finish the paper then, and then you get some of your colleagues to review it for you. And I know it's tough, and it's the first time it feels like you're stealing your own time, because now you missed the 1 month before the deadline, and you can't submit. Well, there will be other deadlines. The deadlines are not the goal, they're an aim for you to get stuff out into the world. But it actually helps to get a paper finished early, put it aside, forget about it while other people look at it, and then come back to it. But it's tough.
So we have plenty of good advice here. Would you like to ask? Yes.
I would like to ask a question, but it's not related to publication. I feel like sometimes, especially PhD students who come from industry background, we then have to fix the work. We want to deliver the best product, the best effort, and stuff like that. But when we started PhD, I felt like we focus on very small problem, and we try to solve it. Which for me it was challenging because I used to look at the problem from all spaces and I want to fix it all, but like my supervisor would like focus on something. So research question must be so specific. This something was really challenging for me. I wanna like give you your input. You mentioned that it's try to something simple, but like it's not simple to focus on something so simple. This one question. Another question is maybe related to this. So when I hear presentations by senior researchers, I feel they are really good at promoting their research, even though they are like a small problem. But sometimes we have doubts because we feel like I'm just trying to fix this small thing, but we have doubts about it. So what's the response?
You mentioned 2 points. The first one, I think, is like having this broader vision or smaller. This is personally, I think it brings a lot of value if you have that experience where you can see like have a broader perspective, also to decide like which area I'm going to focus on and better understand what you are doing. Because like if you go straight to the PhD, I actually did that. But there is more. It's more likely that you're doing something because somebody told you to, whatever it is very small. It's maybe more difficult to understand why is that important and related to the question, which problem am I going to solve? So yeah, those are different skills probably. Both are interesting and can help each other. Well, you cannot do both at the same time. It's good if you have like a very good idea that has huge impact, then it's not so likely. Maybe that would be the rolling very well. So, the other point that you touched was about like confidence. So, about promoting. So there's something that happens a lot. I mean, it's not only in academia; it's maybe related also with communication, like knowing how to defend your ideas is important, having a really become marketing person inside ourselves and gaining confidence is related to that. So I don't have any golden advice here, but that's what happened. I think that sometimes people, I remember I was in a PhD doing something and I was pointing all the bad things about the work that my supervisor said. Like it's normal. Like when you see your problem, you see all the problems there. Like so you have to learn how to defend it. Sometimes I think it's related to confidence. So things may not be as how we also see things help. Small things have value. You cannot solve everything at once.
That's a hard one. So, first of all, I think there are different paths to be successful in research. Different people have different talents or preferences, and some people are better at like organizing a team and doing big projects and promoting those projects and so on. Some people are better at solving small stuff, small problems, small mathematical problems, for example. So both things can happen. And I was trying to connect this to the question of what is a good problem, basically, because it really depends on. I'm kind of assuming something here about your frustration with some small problems, okay? It's because it's something that I felt sometimes, which is, why am I doing this? Is this actually solving a problem? Or am I just trying to find, publish a paper, right? That's the question. And, unfortunately, you have to publish papers to survive, so sometimes you have to do it. There's no way around it. It's better if your small problem is part of a bigger problem. Okay, so I would say a good problem to me is a problem that it's something that interests me, that I like, that I would like to see solved. That's basically that first. then that other people would like to see solved as well. So that would be my question. Even if it's a small problem, would this be interesting if other people like to see this problem solved? If yes, then it's a good problem, and I don't mind working on something small because I know it will be useful somewhere, right? So it's. No, I'm kind of going on a spiral here, but maybe it's not a problem of size; it's a problem of impact or interest to the community. I would say.
Just before we were talking that if both things happen in academia and in industry, academia we have a deeper knowledge and more aware of the state of the art and so on. But in companies, you understand better the problem and have this vision of the impact. And you can have both things involved, and you can solve it the right problem in both areas. But bringing the two together, so I think that your questions make a lot of sense. Maybe you think, why am I doing this? Does it make sense? And I think those are very good questions to ask, and then to answer yourself.
Let me just, Martin, I don't know if you could hear the questions.
Not clearly, no.
I think, okay, so the first question was related to the scale of the problem, that in PhD you're solving a very small problem, and sometimes students struggle to find the meaningfulness of such small problems. And it contrasts with the way that you saw the presentations in the summer school, where lecturers can really promote the solution to a small problem. So I think, like Pavel said, it's related to the impact. So it's the trade-off between these two themes.
Yeah, it is also maybe very few of us are Einstein. Most of us were normal researchers, and we try to contribute pieces to a big puzzle that we all build together. And then sometimes these pieces that we contribute are somewhat smaller, and then you have to have faith that because it's a piece that's in a part of a bigger puzzle, it will make a difference. You care about it. Hopefully your colleagues around you care about it. And then we all add these pieces bit by bit, and together we push our state of knowledge forward, and we solve the bigger problems. That's how I like to look at it. And some of us are lucky enough to occasionally be able to give a really big push, but most of us we contribute small pieces to a gigantic puzzle.
And we can add to your second question. You mentioned that senior researchers very often sound like they're okay promoting the big picture of what they're doing. Part of this comes from the fact that senior researchers often promote the work of others. I'm not sure that's a component of your question, but like feeling comfortable about doing exactly this, right? It's no longer about promoting your own work, but we're actually promoting the work of other people, other students. So in this sense, it also becomes easier, and maybe why it also comes more naturally to later stages in their career. To the first part of your question, there are two comments I want to make. First is that there really is no single way of approaching research or a single style of doing research. Right? So we can focus on system improvements, but we can also contribute to new problem definitions or metrics or new ways of designing user studies. So there are many different ways which you could approach even the same problem from a number of different angles. What helps there is reading very broadly. So don't read just papers related to the problem that you're working on, but read also papers from neighboring areas in computer science, but also papers from other fields that will give you a sense of like what is research, what do other people do? And sometimes you'll get inspired and you'll be able to transfer some of the solutions that people in other fields are proposing to your problem, right? So that's another way to contribute some novelty in your field. And the second thing is seeking mentorship from a variety of different people. During my PhD, I worked with two advisors who were very different, had very different working styles. And that helped me understand, right, that there's no single template for doing research or for doing things in academia. So seeing how other people approach problems, how they work, how they think through the research process, really will really help you grow them. So.
So I have a question. It just came up to me, so it was not one of the 4 questions that was on the slides. So how closely should a PhD student follow the supervisor's advice?
Exactly.
How much trouble do you want to get in?
No. It's exactly the opposite. My hope of your answer is exactly the opposite. So, but please.
Part of the PhD, like probably you were thinking, is being able to do the question yourself, find your path, be able to solve problems, be independent, right? So being independent, or trying to be not completely independent, but more autonomous, right? Researcher is part of the class of the PhD. So being able to say, I don't think that's the right way, or I think that's a better problem, right? So I think something that every supervisor is glad to hear when some good idea comes up, especially when we find that that's a good idea, right? So I think it's important generally to seek for advice and direction and listen, but be also critical about does it make sense? And it's also about like what is the right problem to solve. Don't close your mind to other people's ideas. Use them as an ingredient to build your own, right? And to be critical. And I think that's a positive general for everything in life. Yeah. So how much I don't with care.
I think the role of the advisor is to let you go, right? It's to guide you when, because you don't know how things work at the beginning, but it's his job to make you independent. So, yeah. So I remember on a panel I was like a few years ago about a similar panel, and I remember someone saying, "Oh, when you go to a PhD, you'll be with your advisor for a long time, so it's like a marriage." And I mentioned, no, I don't think it's like a marriage, it's more like an open relationship. Okay, so you are together, but you can also see other people. It's not talk about the research, see what they're doing, and so on.
Make it open.
I'd say it probably depends on which stage of your PhD you're at. If you're working on your first project, then probably listen closely to your advisor, because they simply understand the reality of your community a bit better at that point. But then, as you mentioned, right, the role of the advisor is to help you become independent, is to help you understand who you are as a researcher. What are your unique skills, and what is a unique way in which you can contribute to the research community? So as you gain more and more confidence that you have your own footing and you can contribute, then listen to them less and less. So you don't want to become a copy of your advisor. Once you start feeling like you're not your own person, but you're becoming a copy of your advisor, maybe it's also a signal that it's time to graduate and move to your next thing.
Martin, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would very much second what was just said. So for me, a successful PhD trajectory is one where I very quickly turned from a mentor to more of a coach. And then I don't tell the PhD students what to do, but together we discover what is best for them to do. And so, of course, here in the Netherlands, one of the things you have to learn when you're very young as a kid is you need to learn to cycle, and you need to learn to swim. And so the swimming analogy is one that I like to use also for the PhD students. So you come and join us, and I try to push you into the pool as quickly as possible, and then you swim. And of course, it's my job to make sure you don't drown. But the sooner you swim by yourself, the better.
Great analogy. Good. So I would now move to the second.
There were questions in the audience.
There were? Okay, sorry, I wasn't there. Please.
I was discussing with another PhD student his papers that were rejected, and in a polite way, because he was proposing a new project, in a polite way, I was saying, I don't like wasting my time on that, but I said it in a much more smooth way. But then I said, why don't I like wasting my time on something that won't work? For example, if I'm doing a project, and it's not all even about publication, but that the project, let's say I did something and it didn't work at all, I need to change the direction, and I feel frustrated because I spent my time on doing something that never worked. Probably I should have anticipated that and so on. How to get rid of that feeling that I was just wasting my time on nothing? That didn't happen.
I don't know if you can get rid of that feeling. You probably get used to it faster than you get rid of it, I'd say. I know. It's part of your work. You know, having that at a certain point, you know, given the rejections, or even if you don't actually submit anything, but you see that your work is going nowhere, it's experimental work, so there's always a possibility that it doesn't go anywhere, right? But I think this is, I would say this was mostly answered when we started, right? People, it's from what I understood, it's basically, it's a similar question, right? What we talked earlier about paper rejections, right?
But it's not only about the paper rejection, it's also about just doing the work for nothing. It's not exactly about papers, it's about doing some work.
The question is more related to what if the problem is not good?
Yeah,
what if the problem, like you said,
You probably learned something, right?
it's very, yeah, it's not the same question. I would say the answers are very similar, right? So you learn something, you tried something, it didn't work, you can move on to try other stuff, that's it. So one thing that I remember, at least I learned really fast when I was in my PhD. I don't know if this is true for everyone, but in my case, this was the case, you know, maybe because of the way my advisor worked, was to be very fast at trying stuff. Right? Fail fast. If it's not going to work, you need to discover that fast and move on to the next. So, you know, that was how I learned to do it, right? You want to try something, you're not sure if it's going to work, so be as fast as possible, then move on. It doesn't stop it from being frustrating, but you know, at least you can still submit the paper on the deadline. It's a different paper.
Sometimes the time is really wasted, but more often than not, it's not really wasted, right? So for sure, there are some aspects that worked out, and I think one of the skills that one learns during the PhD is how to creatively pivot your direction. So if there are some components that seem to work, then the question is that you can ask, okay, how can I turn this into a slightly different problem and use what worked and what I tried before? This is a solution that I've tried before. So learn to creatively pivot. And one anecdote here, I remember once a colleague said that, you know, whenever you're working on a new model, if the model works, that's great. You can publish the model. If it doesn't work, then turn it into a privacy paper. So it's just an anecdotal example of how to pivot. There's always a way of look at things from different angles.
So there's one more question.
Yes, so you mentioned not me, but like you mentioned about like reading a lot, but then you have so many papers being published every day, and you have like I don't know, tips on how to strategize reading, because let's say I'm interested in several topics, and every day each topics you have, I don't know, 5 or 10 papers published and then which one should I prioritize, like this kind of things.
Different people have different reading strategies. One strategy, so everybody has to learn to quickly skim the papers for the high level ideas. So just read through the abstract and try to understand what this paper is trying to do. This way you can look through a big number of papers, and then you can categorize them into different queues, right? So you might have a queue for papers that are very closely related to what you are working on. And there are some papers that are totally unrelated to what you are working on, but that you find interesting. And maybe there are some papers where you think, oh, that's an interesting technique, right? So if you have these different queues, then you can structure your time and say, okay, I devote 1 hour a week reading papers that are completely unrelated to what I'm doing, just to broaden my horizons, right? And then I spend more time reading papers that are actually related. So whatever works for you in the end, but learn to quickly skim the papers to the main ideas and have different categories of papers that might be either closely related or not related.
Martin, I don't know if you could hear the question. The question was how to keep up with the flood of papers that we have nowadays.
Yeah, I very much follow and advise Aja's strategy here. So read at different speeds and at different levels of detail. And maybe one other thing to add on top of this is interact with other people, ask for their reading experiences. What did they discover? What did they see at the latest conference that they went to that they would advise you to read, and why? And if at all possible, organize reading groups with people around you. That can be very informal. You don't need your supervisor for that. You just get a few colleagues together, you read papers together, you learn from different ways of looking at those papers, different ways of also asking questions about papers.
One other suggestion, like Martin mentioned, organizing reading groups. If you have more people who would be interested in learning how to read quickly, you can, for example, organize a reading group where people don't read the paper on their own earlier, but you need, and give yourself, say, 30 minutes to read the paper before the reading group starts. And then you discuss, right? And you can see, like, what are the things different people picked on, right? And together you can get a better picture of what the paper is while it's investing further time to actually read.
So we have one more question, and then maybe we move on to the final.
Thank you. My question is more to the planning, research planning at the initial phase, and then the final result that will be reflected to the initial plan. So, what's the impact of, like, when we are going to start the focus on the research? We'll present our research plan, then will be dependent. It contains the working plan that we will do. This is what we are going to do within, let's say, 3 years. So if in case, because in the implementation during the research, it is relative, so it can be changed. As you said, that it can, once we try with one approach, if it doesn't work, we can move. So how far could we move? Because if, yeah, that's what I mean. So is there any impact of initial plan to the result if we move a lot within the implementation period?
I suppose, let me see if I understood. So you're asking, let's say, of course, you have to make a plan, like a proposal at the beginning of PhD. But many things can change during the PhD, and in the end, you might have something that's really far away from your initial proposal. Okay. So this, I guess it depends on my, there's two sides to it. From my point of view, I don't see a big problem in having a final PhD that's very far away from your initial proposal, because it can happen that you switch to a different topic. Or maybe
just add, PhD is research; it's not development.
Yeah, exactly. It's research, so it's I wouldn't say it's expected, but it's not a surprise if that happens. It's not a big deal. Of course, there's the bureaucratic side of things that, like, you make the formal proposal to your university, and now you need to change it. There's all that stuff, but I guess that depends on the institution, I suppose. But from the point of view of research, or from the point of view of an advisor, I would say it's not a problem. It can happen. You can start with a topic and finish with a different topic. It's not. I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Just to make it clear, because based on their reality, I have one friend that is going to depend on this one. So he has his initial plan with the final. Just there was a different one word in the title. When he did the submission, so the administration team gave him two options: whether you are going to change your proposal title or you are going to change your thesis title. So
it depends on the institution.
Yeah, that's the bureaucratic side of stuff. It depends on your institution. Some might be more.
It depends on the bureaucracy rules, the institution, or not. So I would now move on to the other topics, which is what to do after the PhD and how to plan your life after the PhD.
If anyone knows that, we should give advice.
So, well, I don't mean the long term, but more the 2 years after PhD, I think. So the questions that I had here on the slides were, I want to stay in research. So what next steps should I do? And the other question, I think it's also interesting, is how easy is it to move between academia and industry, especially in our area nowadays, where it's easy to go from one place to another and come back and so on. So this is the two key questions. And the other question, and we don't have an equivalent one for industry, but I think it's obvious why. So the other question is, what are the best things of an academic career? The industry is the money, obviously, but so in academia, what is the reasons? But anyway, so the first question, I want to stay in research. What steps should I do? And how easy is it to move between academia and industry?
I think maybe during a PhD student, you can already begin to explore what work would potentially work best for you. So try and do a few internships. Get yourself into a different environment, do different things in different teams, in different ways of working. Try and understand what you like or don't like about these differences. That will help you, that will inform you when you are going to be making choices. Also, these choices, I would advise not to think of them as choices for the next 30 years, maybe the next 3 to 5 years. That's it. Don't look beyond that, because as João just said, there are so many opportunities. You can switch back and forth, and increasingly people do that. People do that because in industry, you might have data resources or compute resources that you won't have in academia. In academia, if you like to work with young talent, if you like to sort of make a difference in their educational trajectories, that's what you can do in academia, not in industry, or it's much less likely. And so at different stages in people's careers, they may prefer one thing over another, and then switch back and forth. Of course, not every year, but it happens. And other disciplines, chemistry, for instance, has that too, because in chemistry, some of the best labs are industrial, right? So that's, if you're a chemist and want to work with the best facilities, you might want to go and work with a big industry partner. But then after a while, it might start to itch. You might maybe go back and teach, take care of the next generations. And so then the question to ask maybe is, what would be things to maintain so that doors to the other side don't close. And so if you, after a PhD, you think, well, you know, I've seen enough academia for now, I want to go into industry, but maybe I want to go back. That's understandable. I think I see that attitude a lot. Well, think about what the academic side would ask. So of course, research. They would also ask that you care about education, that you care about you know, helping the next generation, that you care about knowledge transfer, not just discovering stuff yourself, but also making others benefit from what you discover, and not necessarily in economic terms, but in sort of general societal good terms. So when you think about keeping the doors open, think about these dimensions, keeping them alive. Even in industry, you can do a tutorial, for instance. You can be a mentor to interns. There's lots of educational roles that you could fill, and they will help you if you knock on the academic door again, and vice versa, right? If as an academic you've only done stuff locked up, siloed in your own office, that'll make it somewhat harder to switch to industry than if you had been engaged with other types of stakeholders throughout. Be inspired by the problems, not just that you come up with, but that the rest of the world comes up with. You know, that will also help you transition from academia to industry. Sorry, this was long. Maybe I should stop now. Someone else.
Not at all. So, Marianne, who?
Yeah, I think it was long, but it was very good. So yeah, I think that in this area nowadays it's more easier to change because there are a lot of opportunities and not always have been like that. Some years ago it wasn't. There were many companies doing, for example, machine learning. But yeah, I think I agree with what was said. I think it's very useful for the person to try out, not only to keep the doors open, but to understand what online was. Even during PhD, you learn different skills if you are in a company, and you learn different methods, and that can have different perspectives, and that can also help you with PhD and doing life afterwards. So yeah.
So you're in a particular position. You're in the panel in the sense that you're the head of research. So how would you compare the research that you do both?
So I think I've been in several companies doing research in several ways, and also in
IT.
In IT, in the university.
IT is not IT, it's Institute, Telecommunications Institute.
I think that nowadays you can have a big spectrum, and you can have research that's much more like almost like academia in industries, in some companies. When you have more space, more research that are not so tied to the product, and sometimes. So you can have, so there is a spectrum where you can go, even in academia, people can pair more with the companies and more applied, or more less applied work. For example, at Zendesk, we are building things, so now it's a little bit more applied. We still keep some master students, and there is more research. So even there, you can have a spectrum. You can have like internships where you can decide which type of project you want to do. So yeah, if you can have a big spectrum, it's good to have different speeds of research, and that people communicate them with each other so that they can leverage the best of the worlds. Yeah, I think it's relatively easy, and for that it's good to keep up with the skills that allow you to do that.
add something to this, or do you want to take another question?
I don't know, yeah, please.
Yeah, so when it comes to industry positions, research industry position, I think it's important to really understand the details of what you would be doing, because research in the industry can mean a number of different things. Sometimes they're actually expected to contribute more to the product and not encourage so much to publish externally. And perhaps the biggest determining factor that determines your experience there is who your manager is going to be. So make sure when you get hired with a research position in the industry, you really know who your manager is and what it is that they encourage and appreciate. It's probably true about other jobs as well. When it comes to, so the first part of the question is also about preparation for an academic job. And I think there one can take two strategies for preparing yourself for the academic job market. So the first one is that I think is a bit more risky. And so get really good at something so that you know when the perfect position comes, you know you're going to be the top person. And you can follow this route, it's very risky. The second route you can take is to gain very broad skills so that you are relevant to a broad range of openings for academic positions. So that, say, when they're looking for a machine learning person, you can say, look, I'm basically a machine learning person. I do all of these other things, but I'm a machine learning person. Or when there's an opening for fact research, right, where there's accountability, transparency, say, oh, I did some of the work that is relevant to that. So making yourself relevant to a number of different openings can help you as well, so that you have more chances for being considered.
I don't know if there was a question back there. No?
Maybe one point to add is this other question that you raised in the email that you sent to us to prepare for the panel. What are the best things of an academic career? I think one of the best things is also one of the worst things, namely the diversity of tasks that you're confronted with. Teaching, research, supervision, acquisition, management, doing sort of, what is it, PR, recruiting, what have you. And so that's both fun because you get to learn so many things and do so many different things, but also, if you're not careful, really fragments your time, your brain, your energy.
I think this point that Martin said is probably the best and the worst, which is the freedom that we have at academic jobs have. So you have too much freedom, literally too much freedom. And I think I speak almost for all academic people here. So we are amazing at confusing the knowing how to do something with the time that we have to do something. For example, the summer school was a great idea. It seemed, oh, we know how to do this, but we never took into consideration time. And it took us a lot of time, many weekends. But because we have freedom, we have no one, no way above us, a boss telling us, you cannot do that. So freedom is this two-edged sword.
Just to add, freedom demands a lot of responsibility on your part, right? You have to take care of yourself and others often. So you need to be ready for that, right? And that's something that caught me by surprise. I admit. So that's why I went the route of being the best. Just kidding. It caught me by surprise that I needed, and there's no guidance. We just let you loose. You can do whatever you want, but and no one tells you that you need to deliver, right? Only so you have to make yourself believe your stuff and stuff that works and so on. This doesn't mean that in the industry there's a boss that tells you what to do all the time. That doesn't happen. Okay, but there's a more structured way of doing things. There's no one telling you now you do this, now you do that. There's a more structured way of doing things. There's like a continuous feedback of your work. So you are always in a way guided not by a person but by guidelines that exist in the company. So it's easier in that regard.
Learning how and when to say no is perhaps one of the first skills one has to learn. Like both in academic and in definitely as well. And prioritizing. So recognizing things that are really important for you long term and making sure you set aside some time to do those long-term things. Instead of just focusing on the most urgent things that need to get done right now. It's the two skills that one has to learn sooner or later, and it's a process. It's a long process to learn.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think for everyone, not very easy.
I would just like to share an experience I have just exactly on what AJ said. Learning how to say no when you're academic is important. And I hope you don't get upset for me saying this, Martin and all other people here. So as a student, I think it's also important to learn how to say no to supervisors. As a PhD student, I had this assertiveness soft skill course that I had to do, where I did my PhD, and students actually had to do this sketch where the supervisor approaches the student and the student has to say no to that task. And it's important to, like in relation to what we discussed, the independence, you need to outline the reasons of why to say no, like a plan, like something structured. So it's not just academics, but also I think PhD students, you need to learn this as well.
Any companies, men can be like, can feel like ready, and it's very easy to, depending on the environments, can get overworked. So.
Not just you, but your team also.
Yeah, exactly.
Protect your team.
Protect, like they have that flexible. So I think that's very important. Generally.
Well, that's all we need to know to be an academic.
So there's one question.
Yes, I want to ask because you're mentioning this freedom. So we basically have freedom to do whatever we want, do whatever we are interested in. But the case of science goes often is that we have a lot of things that we are interested in, and how to not lose your other part of your life on the way somehow, or where to say the how to say where you need to stop and go home and take a PhD for a while.
Going home is not enough. The laptop goes with you.
So it's related to say no, we know why, right? Where it's nowhere.
I can tell you that I've disabled emails, getting notifications on the phone. But it's not easy.
Usually you need to learn to do that before you get a divorce notice.
Not with your own experience.
Yeah, part of the problems was being excited about a number of different research problems. I think we all find ourselves sooner than later working on too many projects than we can possibly handle. And this is a difficult one, right? Just letting go. One of the strategies that one can take is learning to appreciate, it was mentioned earlier by Martin, that we're contributing to the bigger community. So just be happy when other people are working on this project, and I appreciate the fact that you can also read the papers that they produce, right? So when you're interested in something, you don't necessarily need to work on these things yourselves, but you can also read what others are working on. that perhaps helps a little.
Martin, I don't know if you'd like to add something to this question, which is, so I will try to repeat it as best as possible. So there are so many interesting ideas that we would like to get involved and how to preserve the personal life. That more or less, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I'm not very good at that. But my family accepts that, and so the boundaries between work and not work at home are hard to observe, to the point that when my daughter was young, during her first few years, she would actually, when she first started drawing, what she drew were, and I kid you not, they were her interpretations of the printouts of plots I had of experimental results. She drew them. And so it really, you know, of course you have your own responsibility. It also depends on your personal situation. I think one of the great challenges of one of the fantastic features of being in research is you can always be a beginner again. There are always new problems somewhere out there. You always have an opportunity to start all over with a new set of problems, a new set of questions. And as Aisha said, I think that's super exciting, and that's certainly what drove me into a research career. It's also a dangerous one. So stepping back, making sure you have enough support folks around you who understand both the insanity of research, but also the need to cool down. Yeah, those are key factors.
There's a lot of positive stress.
Yes.
Positive. I'm always probably too busy, and I'm always with my wife. I'm going to get some rest. I'm not going to do nothing in the next 6 months. You will find something. That's the reply I get. You will always find something. So, because it's difficult not to do the things you like. So if I don't do research, what am I going to do? I don't know. I think all of us are probably like that.
I've had a very empirical approach to setting boundaries. So whenever I reach what I think is a breaking point, then I turn it into a lesson, right? And I try to analyze, okay, what brought me here, and what kind of heuristics and strategies I can implement in the future that I don't end up in this situation again. And for me, having these sort of rules and algorithms that help me determine, when to disconnect, what to take on, when to say no, is really helpful, because it's hard to decide these things in the moment, right? If you have some structure, you have some sort of decision tree that helps you decide what you need to do and when to know, it gets easier, but it takes time to develop these things for yourself.
Yeah, I think that people forget sometimes that we are the owners of our time, so we can decide what to do with our account. It's not easy because it's almost, because it feels like that. I also feel the pain, so I'm not saying that I do it perfectly, but I think it's up to, it's up to us to decide. Maybe I want to speak and by myself with my family, and it sometimes really recharges and allows me to do a better work. So it's not that things don't complement each other. So I feel that it's a learning process. But it's up to each other.
I think it's, you need to learn, for sure it's a learning process, you need to learn to do it. I'm not sure if I know how to do it, but like prioritization, learn how to prioritize stuff, it's very important. So for example, if you're having fun doing research, but somebody calls you and tells you that your house is on fire. So now you have a new priority, right? That you don't question it. You know, I'll stop the research and go to my house. So you have to think about things like that. Like between these two things, I can only do one between these three. So which one is the most important? And you do that. And that's how you making those choices. That's how I handle it. You know, sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. Suppose I'm, you know, another 30 years and I'll be perfect at it.
Bruno, do you like to also add something? Bruno is smiling and just nodding. Oh my God.
I think you need to learn to have a cocktail from 1 to 10. I don't know, it's a process. I'm also in need of another 40 years in order to learn how to do it.
More questions?
For sure. I just want to ask you about the freedom from the academia side. Because, I have a couple of years in industry side, working experience in the academia. So how free we are in the academia? In the industry, of course, we have working hours that we're supposed to follow, but in the academia, we have some schedule for teaching or for the others. So my question is, how free we are when we are working in the academia?
This is more or less common. So I think everyone has a given amount of teaching hours, and then I think this is worldwide. So you have this amount of teaching hours that you have to do. And then research-wise, you have plenty of freedom. Of course, that the freedom is somehow conditioned by the conditions that you have. Like Martin was saying, I'm not going to do research for which you don't have the resources. Resources like computational or data resources. So, but apart from that, me personally, not the university, this is the freedom we have. So I don't know.
I think it's difficult to evaluate. Generally, I think that I agree that in academia you are more freedom to select what to do, like the directions to do. Although, like there are restrictions everywhere, restrictions. Probably are in a group, and somehow big things that are expected to work on, like have pressures to publish by first, so it's not that freedom in that way. You have 50 hours to lecture, so you have to limit of the resources and of people. You don't get money to get people, and that happens also in industry. And you can also say, I like this project, I want to do this project, and you have to convince people. So what about all these things? People say, okay, let's try it out. So it's, I think different ways of getting your real projects out there and having reaching something. And depends a lot on content. It's a startup do a lot of time work on it. Like if a startup, you even do more stuff than probably in academia. You hire, you do everything right. In a bigger company, things are more structured. This being said, it's not impossible to find parts of time to be more freedom. It's difficult. Generally, I agree that you have more freedom. It's not as transparent as it may be.
Maybe Asia can give a different perspective. So maybe you don't have as much teaching as university position.
Yeah, I have fewer teaching obligations, so I can actually devote more time to research. And then, of course, the freedom this gives me is to decide how I want to spend that extra time. The way I've decided to do this is exactly to work interdisciplinarily. This is a bit more difficult than working within, say, one single area, just because you need time to learn about the norms of other fields and help to people. So that actually requires time investment. I totally agree that when we say freedom, we sometimes forget about the structural limitations. Right? You can work on whatever you want, but whatever you get funding for in the end, right? So that's determined by what other people value implicitly. But I want to talk perhaps about a slightly different angle from this, is that sometimes I think we're not truly using the freedom that we have. And I guess this is true, especially if we're gaining independence late in the career. So maybe to make it a bit less abstract, right? So in academia, we very often end up in this mindset of competing with others, of chasing metrics, more papers, more citations, being better on this benchmark or that benchmark, or working on the problems that are currently very hot. So are we using our freedom truly, right? Whenever we're doing that, and so breaking out of that is, every day reminding yourself, I have the freedom to do whatever I want. Given that freedom, what should I do today? I think this is something that underappreciated in freedom discussions.
Martin, I don't know if you would like to add something more to this. So how much freedom is really academic freedom in light of the academic duties?
Well, there's a couple of comments to make, maybe in addition to what the other panel members have already said. So, but of course, you're always part of an organization, and as a member of an organization, you have a certain shared responsibilities, and of course, you contribute in ways that are meaningful to your colleagues, to your organization, and that sometimes you do stuff that maybe would not be at the top of your priority list, but because you're part of the organization, you do it. Right? That could be admin or teaching or supervision, or I don't know. We're in academia, everyone does everything. So for instance, we're moving to a new building in a couple of weeks. You can guess who does a lot of the organizational work, the academics. Not me, I have a special position, but that's often what happens. People care about their environment, people contribute, and we all expect that this happens. Yeah, that something maybe in addition to what Aisha just said about this, the responsibility to take your freedom seriously, and then indeed, try new things. Go where others haven't gone. Don't be disappointed if they look at you with surprise. Where are you going? But do implement your freedom by taking unusual routes. And you'll make mistakes, and that's perfectly fine. You learn stuff. Please share with the rest of us what you learned.
So I think we will end with this good advice from Martin. Thank you all. Bruno, could you be here as well, just to say goodbye to everyone? So, as usual, so this is the end of the summer school. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. We really enjoyed organizing the summer school and having you all here. And Bruno, would you like to ask?
Yeah, so it was a pleasure to organize the summer school. Hope you enjoyed the lectures. Some of the speakers, they in the slides left emails, left contacts that you can use as well. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer additional questions that you have. And I'm sure there will be other opportunities for us to meet in conferences and other types of events. So I guess that's it. Right? Yeah. It was really a pleasure to have you here.
I think this is a nice way of ending the summer school. So you have this perspective of where you are and where you want to get it. So you have Mariana, Pavel, Asia, and Martin. And so let's end with a round of applause to your possible future. Lunch is upstairs.
Thank you.